Let me begin with a question not about love, not about men, but about you. Who is this conversation really for? It is for the woman in her 40s standing at a quiet crossroads. A woman who has already lived through one marriage, who has known commitment, compromise, perhaps even loss, and is now contemplating a second beginning. A woman who whispers to herself, "This time, I want it to be different." But here is the uncomfortable truth. This is not a talk about how to find a better man. It is a talk about how to stop choosing the same story. Because most people approach remarriage with a deceptively simple belief. If I meet a good man, everything will work out. But I want to disrupt that assumption. Is failure really the result of meeting the wrong person? Or is it the consequence of repeating the same unconscious selection pattern? At first glance, failed relationships seem to begin with the flaws of the other person, their temperament, their habits, their limitations. But if we examine more deeply, we often find a more unsettling origin. We do not know what we are truly drawn to. And because we do not know, we repeat. The three misinterpretations that distort midlife choice. In midlife, particularly for women entering remarriage, three critical cognitive distortions tend to emerge. First, confusing loneliness with a reason to marry. Loneliness is not a person, it is a state. And when you attempt to solve a state by choosing a person, distortion begins immediately. Loneliness creates urgency. Urgency collapses discernment. And what feels like connection is often just relief. Second, mistaking control for stability. There is a certain kind of man who radiates certainty, decisiveness, authority, structure. To someone who has experienced instability, this can feel like safety. But certainty is not the same as respect. Control is not the same as protection. And what begins as reassurance can gradually evolve into domination. Third, prioritizing emotional excitement over structural compatibility. Remarriage is not a romantic event. It is a long-term system. Yet many people still evaluate it as if it were a moment of emotional intensity, a spark, a feeling, a sense of destiny. But emotion is volatile. Structure is enduring. And when emotion is placed above structure, the foundation collapses slowly, predictably, and often painfully. The discipline of conscious selection. If there is one principle that must guide midlife remarriage, it is this: you must move from emotional selection to conscious selection. And conscious selection requires discipline. It requires that you impose structure where instinct wants speed. Consider the following non-negotiables: a minimum 1-year observation period, a deliberate examination of behavior under conflict, the maintenance of financial independence and transparency, the inclusion of objective third-party perspectives, and most critically, an honest audit of your current psychological state. Because the most dangerous question is not, do I love this person? The most dangerous question is, from what part of myself am I choosing? The psychology of repetition. Why we choose the familiar pain. There is a concept in psychology known as repetition compulsion, first articulated by Sigmund Freud. It describes the human tendency to recreate unresolved emotional experiences, not because we enjoy suffering, but because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. In practice, this means a woman who once endured a controlling partner may find herself drawn to another controlling figure. Someone who struggled to receive emotional expression may again choose a partner who is emotionally unavailable. Patterns of financial instability may quietly repeat across relationships. Why? Because familiarity is neurologically efficient. It is encoded in the brain's emotional memory systems. If at some point in life love was associated with effort, endurance, or emotional deprivation, then the mind internalizes a silent equation. Love must be earned through struggle. And so without realizing it, we choose struggle again. Not because it is good, but because it is known. A philosophical parallel, the illusion of familiar forms. Ancient philosophical traditions have long warned about this phenomenon. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there is a striking idea. After death, consciousness does not immediately transcend. It drifts through an intermediate state, drawn toward familiar forms, even if those forms lead back into suffering. Now interpret this psychologically. We do the same thing in relationships. We move not toward what is healthy, but toward what is familiar, even when that familiarity is painful, because the unfamiliar, even when healthy, feels unsafe. This is the paradox of human attachment. We often prefer a known discomfort over an unknown peace. Remarriage is not about love. It is about awareness. This brings us to a critical reframing. Remarriage is not primarily a process of finding love. It is a process of evolving consciousness. If your awareness has not changed, your outcome will not change. Only the characters will. And this is why so many second marriages fail, not because people do not try, but because they do not see. They do not see the internal mechanisms driving their choices. They do not see how loneliness distorts perception. They do not see how emotional memory overrides rational judgment. They believe they are choosing logically, but in reality, they are remembering emotionally. What comes next? In the deeper analysis that follows, we will systematically dissect the hidden cognitive biases that distort partner selection, the unconscious mechanisms that drive attraction, why emotional memory consistently overrides logic, how loneliness suppresses risk detection, and why diminished self-worth increases tolerance for control. This is not a conversation designed to comfort. It is designed to clarify, because clarity, not hope, is what prevents repetition. If this perspective resonates with you, stay with this inquiry until the end. Examine not just who you are choosing, but how you are choosing. And if you find value in this kind of structural, unflinching analysis, consider subscribing and sharing so that fewer people repeat patterns they never intended to live again. Now, let us proceed, not into the world of romance, but into the architecture of choice itself. In the previous discussion, we arrived at a critical realization. Remarriage is not about finding a better partner. It is about transforming the level of awareness from which you choose. Now, we take the next step. If awareness is the foundation, then structure must be the method, because insight without structure collapses under emotion. So the question becomes, how do we make decisions that are not hijacked by feeling, fear, or familiarity? From emotion to measurement, the decision grid. Let us begin with a principle that may feel uncomfortable, even clinical. Important life decisions should not rely solely on emotional intuition. They require structure. In midlife remarriage, one of the most effective tools is what we can call a decision grid, a framework that translates subjective impressions into measurable criteria. Each critical dimension of a partner is evaluated on a scale from 1 to 5. Conflict regulation capacity, ability to acknowledge responsibility, financial transparency, control over alcohol consumption, respect for personal autonomy, attitude toward children. This is not about reducing a human being to numbers. It is about protecting yourself from emotional distortion. Because when emotions intensify, perception narrows. And when perception narrows, risk signals disappear. A simple rule applies. If the total score falls below 70%, the relationship must be reconsidered. Not emotionally debated, not rationalized, reconsidered. Because scoring is not a judgment of the other person, it is a safeguard against self-deception. The boundary contract, clarity before attachment. Next, we must address a domain where many intelligent people fail not due to ignorance, but due to hesitation. Boundaries. Before remarriage, there are non-negotiable agreements that must be explicitly defined. Separation of premarital assets, clear agreement on shared expenses, absolute prohibition of debt guarantees, legal and structural protection of children's assets, explicit designation of insurance and pension beneficiaries. Why must this happen early? Because once emotional attachment deepens, negotiation becomes compromise. And compromise in this domain often becomes vulnerability. Clarity is easiest before love intensifies. After that, clarity becomes costly. The deeper layer you do not choose them, you reveal yourself. At this point, we must confront a more profound, almost unsettling idea. Ancient wisdom texts, such as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, offer a striking insight. What appears before us is often a projection of our own consciousness. Translated into psychological terms, the type of person you are drawn to is not random. It is reflective. If you are drawn to control, it may reflect a history of unmet validation. If you tolerate aggression, it may signal diminished self-worth. If you accept addiction, it may reveal a savior complex. The critical mistake most people make is this: they try to eliminate the wrong person instead of examining the internal pattern that selected them. The problem is not the image. The problem is the lens. Breaking the cycle, strategic intervention. So how do we interrupt repetition? Not through hope, not through willpower alone, but through deliberate intervention. Here are the operational strategies. Do not make decisions from a state of loneliness. Actively seek objective third-party perspectives. Refuse to accelerate the timeline of commitment. Maintain financial independence as a structural safeguard. If children are involved, integrate professional guidance into the process. These are not suggestions. They are safeguards against predictable cognitive failure. Awareness, not suppression, but observation. Now we arrive at the central philosophical principle. Awareness does not mean suppressing emotion. It means observing emotion without being governed by it. Excitement is not the enemy. Attachment is not the enemy. Unexamined reaction is. Many people believe success in remarriage is a matter of luck, of finally meeting the right person. But that belief is incomplete. Success is not random. It is constructed. Yes, these frameworks may feel cold. Yes, checklists may seem unromantic. But emotion is temporary. Structure is enduring. If you cannot recognize what is healthy, you will return again and again to what is familiar, even if that familiarity is pain. Let us distill everything into a single, uncompromising truth. The greatest threat to remarriage is not a dangerous partner. It is an unconscious choice. We are often not seeing the person in front of us. We are seeing a projection shaped by our fears, our needs, and our unresolved past. Control may appear as protection. Obsession may appear as devotion. Dependence may appear as love. But appearances are not reality. They are interpretations often written by fear. The unanswered question. And now we arrive at a question most people avoid. If you made the right choice, will everything be safe afterward? Many assume, if I choose correctly this time, the rest will take care of itself. But this assumption is flawed, because the true test of a relationship does not occur at the wedding. It emerges between years 3 and 5. Why? Because that is when illusion fades and structure reveals itself. What comes next? In the next lecture, we will move beyond selection and examine post-marriage structural reality. How financial control conflicts begin. When joint asset requests become warning signals. Why step-family dynamics often destabilize the system. Why intimacy declines sharply around year 3. How unconscious power struggles emerge. And most importantly, why the conflict patterns from your previous marriage reappear, wearing a different face. Ancient philosophy warns us, if you fail to recognize the truth, you repeat the cycle. In modern terms, if awareness does not evolve, patterns do not change. Remarriage is not a fresh start. It is an imtihan, an examination of consciousness. Clarity is always available. But when fear and desire intensify, we choose what is familiar instead of what is true. This series is not designed to blame. It is designed to interrupt repetition. If this analysis has been valuable to you, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing so that others may avoid repeating patterns they never intended to live. In the next session, we will not discuss how to avoid conflict. We will discuss how to manage it structurally, because remarriage is not a gamble of emotion. It is a system that can be designed, and only conscious choices have the power to end unconscious repetition. I will see you in the next lecture.